Welcome to the Alyosha Society, where we're pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. My name is Bruce Setter. I'm the founder of the Alyosha Society. Now, this video is primarily for members of the Alyosha Society, although I'm going to put it on the YouTube channel. Anyone's welcome to watch it, because in the Alyosha Society, the second half of the summer of 2024, we are starting a new book. Yeah, To Kill a Mockingbird. And so when we start a new book in the Alyosha Society, what I like to do is to do an introduction of that book. So let's figure out, what can we learn about the author of the book? What can we learn about the historical context of the book? And that will help us understand the book a lot better. So I have a philosophy. I say this a lot with my high school students. I say, you don't hate books. Some students might think they do, but they don't. They're just not understanding what they're reading. The more you understand what you're reading, the more that you'll like it, the more you'll appreciate it. So I have what I call the literary toolbox. Now, the literary toolbox is basically, let me just show you what's inside the literary toolbox. 5 tools: historical context, biographical context, the genre questions, literary devices, and elements of a plot. So when we start a new book, we go through all 5 of these tools. Using these tools will help you understand the book a lot better and enjoy it. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is focusing on 2 of the 5 literary tools in the literary toolbox: the historical context and the biographical context of To Kill a Mockingbird. When was it written? Who wrote it? Why did she write it? What was going on at the time? All of those kinds of questions. So let's get right to it. Let's begin. I like family trees. I don't know what it is. There's something about when I'm studying a new author, or even within the story itself, I love to make family trees. I don't know. There's something about it that just helps my brain grasp the material better. So here we go. Here is a very basic family tree of Harper Lee. Now, the first thing you'll notice here, friends, oh, don't you love it when you get surprises right from the beginning? Yeah, well, the first thing you notice is that her name is not Harper. No, that's not her first name, actually. Her first name was Nell. And she wanted to go with her middle name and call herself Harper Lee because she did not want her first name to be mispronounced. So a lot of people would call her things like Nellie and so forth, but her name was Nell Harper Lee. And her last name was always Lee because she never got married. She remained single her entire life. So here we go. Amasa, I'm not sure how her father's name was pronounced, but Frances was her mother. Harper Lee was the youngest of 4 children. So there's Alice, who was born in 1911. Louise, 5 years after that. The only boy in the family, Edwin, in 1920. And then Harper Lee was born 6 years after Edwin in 1926. Now, friends, let's look at the scope of her life. Her life spans, I know, she lived a long one. I'm trying to make sure I put myself over here out of the way. She lived a long one. Look at this. That's right. This timeline everything. Can you imagine that? Everything that happened inside of this box happened during the lifetime of Harper Lee. Yeah, I know. That's it's after World War I, of course, but World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, the Cold War. I mean, who knows how many presidents that she lived through, but she died in 2016. Now, the reason I want to show this timeline, just to kind of put the book in a big picture historical perspective. So we're going to come down here in 1960. Yeah. 19. Now, that is a very fascinating date. And a little bit later in this video, I'm going to be showing you a slide called Race and Reception. And we're going to talk about why 1960 is such a fascinating date. That's the year of publication. She was writing the book in the late 50s and published in 1960. Now, Harper Lee, you may know this, only published one other novel in her lifetime. In fact, the novel had been written for a very long time. The novel is actually meant to be a prequel to Kill a Mockingbird. And some of you may remember just a few years ago, there was a lot of hubbub about the release of Go Set a Watchman, 2015. So she finally agreed to the publication of this novel that had been written a long time ago. And then she died 1 year after its publication in 2016. So let's talk a little bit about Harper Lee. Let's see. The first thing I got to do is figure out where to put myself. Okay. First of all, where? Yeah, the where is important. Deep South. Now, friends, that's going to be important in reading through this novel. You know, Harper Lee knew Southern culture. And that's really a lot of what's involved in reading To Kill a Mockingbird is understanding Southern culture, Southern isms. I kind of grew up in the South and went to school in the South myself. So, you know, learning how to speak Southern will be important in understanding To Kill a Mockingbird. So Monroeville, Alabama, her father was an attorney. And if you already know a little bit about the story, then you may be thinking, hey, wait a second. Isn't this story about a young girl whose father was an attorney? Yes, that's right. Her father was sort of the model character or a model for the character Atticus Finch, who is one of the main characters in To Kill a Mockingbird. More on that later. Now, I don't know exactly when it took place, but when she was a child, Harper Lee met a man who would become quite famous himself, Truman Capote. You may have heard of him, and you may have even read some of his works because he ended up becoming a very famous writer. Movies made based on his books, you know, In Cold Blood, Breakfast at Tiffany's. You've probably heard of those. So they became lifelong friends, even called themselves best friends at one point. And when you're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, there will be a character named Dill. And that character is based on Harper Lee's good friend, Truman Capote. A little bit more on him later. Now, to the frustration of her father, Harper attended the University of Alabama. She was working on a law degree and came basically this close to finishing her law degree and ended up dropping out and pursuing a career in writing. She also spent a year at Oxford as an exchange student, but that's, you know, I know a few people who have done that. I have never understood that. She literally, I think she had maybe one semester left or something like that. But in 1949, so do the math here, friends, 23. So she's 23 years old at this point, and she decides that she really wants to get her writing career off the ground. She moves to New York City. She did various and sundry things to pay the bills, including working as an airline, you know, reservation agent, and then she was writing in her spare time. Now, notice the date there, 1949. We're getting a little bit closer to the publication date. There it is, To Kill a Mockingbird, 1960. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit later in this video on how the novel was received when it first came out. But by and large, it was tremendously successful, not only in, you know, just popular reading, but also, you know, it won a Pulitzer for fiction in 1961, the year out. Imagine that, your first novel, and you win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And she won that the year after it was published. One of the other interesting things that Harper Lee did was she helped her friend Truman Capote do the research for his very famous novel In Cold Blood, which is a novel. It is a fictional account, but it was based on a 1959 basically massacre of a family of four in a small farming town in Kansas. Yeah, so that's kind of fascinating. And she traveled with Truman Capote and helped him do research to make sure that he had his facts relatively straight. There's a lot of controversy over that too, to be honest, but we're not here to talk about Truman Capote. I have seen the movie, and it's quite interesting, the movie that was made from that novel. So I'm really skipping up here because I'm trying to just hit the highlights, but she was recognized by two different presidents of the United States, which I think is kind of interesting. In 2007, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by George W. Bush, and then the National Medal of Arts 3 years later by President Barack Obama. So she has been recognized by our leaders. And as I mentioned earlier, just a year before she died, her other novel, Go Set a Watchman, which was originally an early draft of To Kill a Mockingbird, but it was published the year before she died. And then there it is. She passed away in the same place where she was born, back to her roots in Monroeville, Alabama in 2016. So as of the making of this video, that was only 8 years ago that she passed away. A couple of images I want to show you here just so you can kind of get a feel. This is a picture of Harper Lee with her father. I believe, if I remember correctly, she was 19 or 20 years old in this picture, but there she is just relaxing with her dad. Here she is getting that award I mentioned earlier from the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush, 2007. And so I want to wrap up, friends, with, let me put myself over here, with a couple of some comments on race and reception. Race and reception. These are just some little factoids that I think as you're reading through the novel, hopefully make the story a little bit more meaningful. First of all, I want to talk about 1960. What was important about the year 1960? Well, yeah, if you lived through it, you probably know that little did the world know that our culture was really on the precipice of undergoing a tremendous revolution. This is right kind of at the beginning, kind of in the middle of the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution. There's a lot of things, not only that were happening, but that were getting ready to happen. So here we are, guys, barely at the end of the Jim Crow era. Now think about that. So think about what 1960 is sandwiched in between. 1954 was Brown versus the Board of Education. So just a few years before was the Supreme Court decision that outlawed segregation in public schools. Just a few years after the publication of the novel was the Civil Rights Act, 1964, which again made it illegal for anyone to discriminate against another person based on the color of their skin. And of course, race is going to be a tremendously important issue in this story. So that's really significant. So in a sense, whether she realized it or not, Harper Lee wrote this story at an incredibly pivotal time in our nation's history on a serious sort of lightning rod issue. It is, I don't know to what extent that Harper Lee modeled her story after this case, but she certainly knew about it, and it was certainly on her mind. That is the 1931 case involving the Scottsboro boys. And you can look this up. I'm not going to give you all the details here, but it was 9 black males who were accused and eventually all of them convicted of raping 2 white girls in Tennessee. Now, I'm gonna let you research that, and it is widely believed that there was some tremendous injustices done in that case, but some have even speculated that Harper Lee actually modeled the book after this case, changed the facts here and there a little bit, but you will know that that the story involves a black male raping a white girl. So yeah. So again, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the point is that this is a lightning bolt issue. It's not that race kind of still isn't, but this is certainly a pivotal time in our nation's history, 1960. Okay, race and reception. What about reception? Well, there were mixed reviews. Some folks, obviously, you can imagine, some folks didn't like the story at all. Some folks believed that it was, sensationalized and, that it was sort of, uh, a story that was sort of raising, causing dissension and division for no reason. But it sold about 500,000 copies in the first year. Won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, 1961. That's huge. It was recognized almost as a classic right from the beginning. Bestseller, 40 million copies sold. I don't know what that number is as of this very date, but that's just that number is pretty staggering. Now, I don't want to get into this discussion. I just want to point out that there are some critics who have called it the best novel of the 20th century. Now, I'm not sure if I would go quite that far, but wow, that's huge. That's huge. So there you have it, race and reception. So there's just a little bit from our literary toolbox, some biographical context, historical context, as we here at the Alyosha Society begin reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And if you would like to, if you're watching this video and you're not a member of the Alyosha Society, we'd love to have you. We're going to begin reading and discussing To Kill a Mockingbird, probably the second week of July. Here, and again, we're in the summer of 2024, but check us out if you're watching this video long after we've read and discussed To Kill a Mockingbird. Check us out at www.alyoshasociety.com. Send me an email. I'd love to correspond with you. Bruce@alyoshasociety.com. Thanks for listening, friends.